If an American, because his skin is dark, cannot eat lunch in a restaurant open to the public, if he cannot send his children to the best public school available, if he cannot vote for the public officials who represent him, if, in short, he cannot enjoy the full and free life which all of us want, then who among us would be content to have the color of his skin changed and stand in his place?
Voting rights. In the United States, we've come so far in regards to American suffrage. If you look back at the struggles of voting rights, you see white, property-owning men voting, and then the 15th Amendment giving African Americans the right to vote, and then on to women's suffrage, Native Americans, Asian Americans, and of course, the Latinos in the same fashion. However, even with this process, many struggle with voting processes today, including electronic versus paper ballots, voter identification issues, felon disenfranchisement, and the disparity between old and young voters. These are just a few of the major issues that we have today in our society with voting.
One of the major issues concerning the American voting systems today involves the unreliability of electronic voting machines and the resulting voter identification issues. Many politicians and experts have argued and demonstrated that the machines can be easily hacked and the voting results can be changed. Also, this process of hacking leaves no paper trail, so it becomes extremely difficult to determine the actual voting results or to do a recount of the ballots. Most experts say that the best system of voting is to mark paper ballots and then scan them with a computer. This way, there's a physical paper trail in case a recount is needed and it is much more difficult to rig the ballots.
That is really the gold standard. It's the thing you need. And this machine has no way of creating that record. And so there's no way to fix this by changing the software or putting better security seals on it or anything like that.
Also, it can be argued that the amount of voter fraud has the potential to increase the more that these electronic voting machines are used. So another problem that arises is the question of whether or not it should be required to have a government-issued driver's license or other ID. The concern is that this is discriminating against poorer citizens because they are the ones who don't have a car to have that ID. Also, it is common for wealthier areas to have more voting machines in them, which in turn makes them better represented in elections. In many poor, particularly minority-filled neighborhoods, lines to vote can reach up to hundreds of people in hours of waiting time, which discourages these people from voting at all.
Do you have a preference of how people vote, like electronic paper?
Well, I would prefer that people vote in person with paper and showing up, producing a valid government-issued identification card as opposed to electronic, because I really believe that if people voted electronically, that would just give rise to a lot of voter fraud without the verifications.
If there is not a good opportunity for a person to acquire an ID without cost, in a fashion that doesn't create hardship, many people will be discouraged from voting.
Republicans have introduced a photo ID bill that the Institute for Southern Studies estimates will cost taxpayers $20 million, and the target is voter fraud. 5 people in recent history, 5 people across the country, have been arrested for voter fraud.
When you go to a grocery store and you want to use your debit card and it doesn't work, and they say, well, can I see your identification? I mean, it's a very minimal intrusion to ask to see someone's identification.
A second major modern-day voting issue involves the disenfranchisement of felons in the U.S. In most states, people lose the right to vote when they commit a felony, and they are disenfranchised while they are in prison and on parole. It's estimated that about 5.3 million American citizens are silenced in the voting process because of their felony convictions. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, in Arizona alone, 176,103 citizens are disenfranchised because of a previous felony, 13% of which are African American.
How do you feel about felon disenfranchisement? So do you feel that felons should be able to vote?
Well, I don't think our society should be Joe Ver's chasing John Valjean around for crimes that they've committed years and years ago. There are certain levels of felony that I believe, that after a certain period of time, that the citizens should be able to have demonstrated that they have paid their debt to society and that they are no longer a threat to society, and that they should have the opportunity to vote.
So there are 5.3 million Americans who can't vote because of felony convictions, and 4 million of them are no longer in prison. So, Roger, what's the case for keeping that many people out of the political process?
If you are not willing to follow the law yourself, then you shouldn't be making the law for everyone else.
For me, when I came out, I definitely wanted to vote because I knew while I was inside, I still faced the issues that my community faced, but I was powerless to help them. So I knew how important the vote was. For the first time, 5 years passed, I went off parole, and I actually had my right restored 2 years ago to vote.
And how did that moment feel?
It was an amazing moment. When I pulled that lever, I felt my rebirth as a citizen again, to have that power to vote.
A third controversial modern-day voting problem is the disparity between younger voters and older voters. The demographic of voters between the ages of 18 and 24 generally has the lowest voter turnout out of any age levels. Some reasons behind this are that kids feel that they can't really make a difference in American government, and some just don't care. However, it is becoming increasingly important for these younger adults to vote, as the members of the baby boomer generation are now beginning to enter retirement. The baby boomers' votes will heavily influence things such as Social Security and Medicare. And if the 18 to 24-year-olds aren't careful, the boomers might alter how much funding these programs are getting in their favor.
We need your opinion on voting and how you think teenagers affect outcomes of elections and what generally teenagers think of voting.
I'm going to say teenagers think that they don't have to vote because they think everybody else is going to vote for them. You know, they're just like, whatever, I'm not making a difference. But I think they should.
I think that people need to be educated before they vote.
A lot of teenagers have a viewpoint on voting that it's kind of like a drop in the ocean kind of feeling, like it's just one vote, what difference could it really make in the world?
I think teenagers vote based on their parents.
We can't complain about what's happening if we haven't voted. Our vote, we have to make sure it counts. If you're going to be complaining about something and you haven't voted, you shouldn't be complaining because you didn't even try to change it.
You're not going to vote, Connor?
I don't know anything on. See, the reason is because even if I was 18, the way that our system is set up, I just don't think my vote's really going to make a difference.
Are you going to vote?
Yeah, for Herman Cain. I'm not voting.
Do you think you'll be voting?
No, I don't think so.
Personally, I'm pretty distraught that the 18 to 24 age group, which is what we're going to be falling into once we start voting, is consistently the lowest voting population of any demographic in United States elections. I think it's the result of like a general dissatisfaction with the political system, sort of like an anti-establishment attitude coupled with the idea that as much as like we don't like things, we can't necessarily change them by our singular votes.
Will you be voting in the 2012 election?
Probably.
They want to participate. You know, they're saying they're likely to vote, they're somewhat likely to vote, they want to show up. But there's a couple things standing in the way. One, I think they are more cynical about the political process. They're paying attention and getting frustrated with, you know, the corporate influence of politics, in politics and the pace of change.
You know, when I see young kids in particular who won't vote, and they think, you know, why should I vote? You vote because a lot of people lost their lives going, you know, trying to vote. You know, in the South, even though the 15th Amendment had been passed, you know, if you went to the polling place, you may lose your job. you may be strung up on a tree. And when you know that people have lost their lives for that sacred right to vote, and you sit and you take that right for granted, I think is an abomination on the people who came before. And I think that not just young African American kids, but all kids.
In this documentary, we've looked at problems of electronic voting, issues with voter identification, felon disenfranchisement, and the disparity between young and old voters. These problems are very significant, especially for the future of our country, and they will affect how the American people can express their opinions on these issues. Now I ask you to vote, to make your voice heard regarding issues that are close to your heart. But without a doubt, the core of democracy is about voting.
100 years of delay have passed since President Lincoln freed the slaves, yet their heirs, their grandsons, are not fully free. They are not yet freed from the bonds of injustice. They are not yet freed from social and economic oppression. And this nation, for all its hopes and all its boasts, will not be fully free until all its citizens are free.